All right, everybody, we're going to get started here. Burmese military arrests government for election fraud. Is this coming to the U.S.? Massive story happening. Just took place last night. We're going to get into it all here on this quick live stream that I'm going to be doing. My name is Justin Deschamps. I'm from Stillness in the Storm, and this is Awarewolf Radio. For this broadcast, we're going to be covering the story that broke yesterday. It has a lot of interesting connections that we're going to cover deeply. Go ahead, I'm going to update while I'm on the stream the description for this video, so you'll be able to see the article that we're pulling from, which we just released moments ago. And this is going to help if you're interested in a deeper comprehension of all this. This should give you plenty of information and knowledge to work with here. So what happened? Well, before we get into that, do me a favor. Go on over to stillnessinthestorm.com/donate, and please help us by making a donation, either via PayPal, cryptocurrency, Cash App, or you can even become a subscriber on Subscribestar to help this news and other great things that we're doing on Stillness in the Storm to support us in our ventures here. So let's get right into the story. I'm going to go ahead and let's read from this article. Leaders of the Southeast Asia country of Myanmar, also known as Burma, have been arrested by the nation's military for allegedly committing massive voter fraud during the November 2020 elections. Interesting. We're going to get into a little bit later in the video here how this connects potentially to what could potentially happen here, and some of the deep state actors that all of the famous actors that we know and love here in the US and how they're connected to this story. So Myanmar State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi, hopefully I'm pronouncing that properly, and President Win Mint were both arrested in morning raids on Monday. This is probably Monday, Southeast Asia time, so that's probably why the story broke here in the US last night. And they were arrested by the nation's armed forces after widespread allegations that they had committed massive election fraud. Now, the whole situation is starting to mirror what looked like took place here in the U.S., and this might be foreshadowing for what came here, which we'll get into. Myanmar State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi and President Win were both arrested in morning raids on Monday by the nation's armed forces after widespread allegations that they'd committed election fraud. The official results of the November election in Myanmar, also known as Burma, showed a victory for the Liberals, for the Liberal National League for Democracy, NLD, which is led by Aung San Suu Kyi. The Conservative Nationalist Union Solidarity Development Party, USDP, which is the opposing party, was supported by many members of the military, lost several seats. However, it soon became apparent, according to the military, that massive voter fraud had taken place. Now, on the 15th, which was, about 2 weeks ago, a little more than 2 weeks ago, the USDP, which is kind of like it sounds like their version of the conservatives, released over 94,000 cases of election fraud in 6 townships, and some subsequently called for a new fair election supervised by the military and the country's election commission. You're starting to see some of these connections to the US here. Let me pause here for a moment to suggest to you that this is essentially what a lot of people are suggesting we needed to do with the United States. Now, if you're familiar with statistical analysis, when you're trying to figure out what's happening in any given phenomenon, you often take samples. And if you take enough samples in that data set, like let's say you sample 1% of bread to see if the bread you just produced in a 10,000 batch is actually good. And out of that 1%, 50% of the loaves have mold on them or weren't baked properly, then it's a pretty safe bet to suggest that the rest of the bread that's in that sample, or in that batch, is not good anymore. So it's the same kind of idea. If you have different pieces of the election that you're examining, and you, like, say 50% of what you examine has fraud in there, then it's a pretty good bet that there's fraud everywhere. Let's keep reading. Major General Zaw Min Soon, a spokesman for the Myanmar military, pointed out that a further 8.6 million irregularities in 314 townships had been identified, suggesting that a large number of voters had voted multiple times and urged the election commission to take action. Again, does this sound familiar? I mean, we had dead people were voting in the 2020 US election. We had people seemingly who had voted multiple times. We had people who had their mail-in ballots filled out for them, or people who showed up to vote and said, no, you already voted. And we also had a lot of people calling for us to re-examine this election, and if need be, have a new election, what's called the re-election. General Zaw Ming Toon had been calling for election commission to provide final voter lists for cross-checking in order to verify whether fraud had taken place or not. Quote, in Sa Ping Kang village, an underage girl was able to cast a vote. She is just 16 years old, said former USDP lower house candidate Yu Ning Sang, who claims to have been a victim of fraud. She was forced by her neighbor to go and vote. Again, let me pause here for a moment. There are multiple instances of people, this is what's called ballot harvesting. And Project Veritas had posted some of this, where people were going around and collecting ballots, not necessarily for the past election, but for previous elections. And there's probably a lot of evidence out there that we haven't seen of people doing this. So the idea is that let's say you're some elderly person, or you don't really care to vote in an election, but somebody knocks on your door and they say, hey, you should go vote. And you're like, well, I don't really care about voting. Why would I want to vote? And they said, don't worry, no, you have to vote. You have to vote. And if you don't go and vote, maybe they'll strong arm you a little bit. Maybe they'll pay you money. I mean, this is what was happening in some of these places here in the US. So this idea that the US has like these perfect flawless elections is a myth. And what the deep state run media, the radical left media, the Biden media is suggesting is that any question of the election integrity is itself some type of treasonous act. That's ridiculous. Let's keep reading. Quote, not resolving this in line with the law means this is a political crisis, the general told reporters last week. The weak-willed election commission, which was appointed by the NLD, declined to acknowledge the evidence. So that's pretty significant again here. What do we have in the US? We have at multiple levels. We have at the electoral process, the people are actually inside the polling stations, refusing to allow poll workers to see. Look at the situation, look at the voting and make sure it was fair and free. Especially people who were conservative, they were denied the ability to observe the vote process. We have state officials and courts refusing to look at evidence. Ted Cruz was out there saying earlier today, and I was just, really disappointed. What a disgrace that he was saying that the courts examined evidence and didn't find any voter fraud. That's a flat out lie. The courts didn't examine any evidence at all. So this sounds very familiar, doesn't it? This is something that I really wanted to showcase for y'all here, is that this situation here with Myanmar and Burma, which is the two names for the same country, is like a beta test, a kind of microcosmic example, to use that term loosely, for what happened in the US. The correspondence, the connections, the similarities between what happened in their voter election in 2020 in November and what happened in ours is striking. Ultimately, the military issued an ultimatum to the NLD government for failing to, quote, respect and abide by, end quote, the Constitution of Myanmar. Again, sound familiar? There are a lot of people who are saying that the vote is sacred here in the US. Our Constitution makes that very clear in many different ways. If our elected officials fail to honor the Constitution and defend and protect the laws of the land as they are required to by their oath, then they are effectively committing treason. And that would mean that some other person would have to act. Now, in the United States, and this is what I talked about in the last stream, the thing that we use to protect our rights when the government fails and the corruption happens is law enforcement. Now, in the Declaration of Independence, it basically explicitly tells us that when a government has lost its lawful rights to govern the people by the consent of the governed, then somebody has to act to reform and change the government and fix the situation. Now, before people go out and grab their pitchforks, what we would do is we would go and basically give our right to create a new government to a specific body that is, an expert in these kind of things. So instead of us mucking about and probably not really doing a good job and probably failing horribly at it because we don't know how to do this, we would go to a military organization. We would go to the military and they would act on our behalf. So in order to stop the steal, hold on, let me back up a second. Quote, if one does not follow the law, such a law must be revoked, General Ming Aung Hlaing declared on Thursday in a video address to military officers. So before this mass arrest took place, or this arrest, I should say, not mass arrest, before this arrest took place, the military was kind of preparing the people for what might happen. They spent a lot of time revealing the fraud, most likely, to the people, so that when this event happened, the people believed that what was about to happen and what did happen with respect to the arrest of these leaders was actually good for the country. Again, sound familiar? Let me continue reading. In order to stop the steal, the military ultimately took decisive action on Monday morning against what had been described as, quote, dishonesty and unfairness in the November election. Military leaders who claim the vote was fraudulent have now declared a year-long state of emergency, transferred all power to Senior General Ming Aung Hlaing, appointed Vice President Mint Sue, a former general, so that person is a former general, acting as president, and closed all banks until further notice. It's pretty intense. I'll be the first to admit, having that level of military takeover would be jarring for a lot of people, and even me. It'd be a lot to handle. But if the military in this situation was truly going to honor the mandate of the people to protect the rights and of the people and reform the government to expose the fraud, and this would be a kind of, I'm going to make a pretty bold statement here, this would be endorsed by God. Now, why would I say something like that? Because our rights are given to us by God, and when another takes on the duty as a trustee to protect and safeguard our rights, then they're acting as a custodian of those God-given rights, that God-given property, and therefore that person, which is another type of right, by the way, when you convey your rights to another and you act as a fiduciary, as it's sometimes called, then that is a God-given or God-created concept or God-created role. So that's why I say it's endorsed by God in that sense. Not necessarily saying that God is literally like, putting his chips in one place or another, but God does, if he gave us these rights, if he gave us the power to defend and protect our rights, if he gave us the power to create bodies and organizations like a government that derives its authority from the consent of the governed. Does this sound familiar? Declaration of Independence. Then God always endorses righteous action when rights are being honored, defended, and protected, and he condones and abhors unrighteous action, which we generally refer to as sin. So you go against God's will, you violate a person's rights, you're a sinner, you're a bad guy. You honor God's rights, you honor God's will, you honor the rights of the people, you're endorsed by God, you're upheld by God, you're a faith son of God, as it's sometimes referred. So let's get into some of the conspiracies about this. It's informative to observe that the Burmese military is more conscientious about its duty to the Burmese Constitution than the United States is to its supposed duty to the US Constitution, unless, that is, the US military is planning its own takeover event. So it would seem at this point that, we might be thinking, well, dang, so Burma's military gone out there and did the right thing. Well, what the heck's taken our military so long? Well, it's a delicate situation. You can't just compare, apples to oranges, so to speak. But from what I've heard several rumors at this point that from people who have family in the military. We posted an article about it on our website, that there are people in the military, most of the militaries, from what I've heard, that are definitely constitutionally loyalist, that believe in God, believe in this idea that it is their duty to defend and protect the people, which is a sacred aspect of the military. And they are working hard right now to do something. And we have a lot of indications on that. Go ahead and check out Stillness in the Storm for more on that. So Myanmar is observably more serious about preventing voter fraud than our own government and military appear to be for now. Definitely the government. And then for the military, we don't know. But for all intents and purposes, and this is more to emphasize the point, we want to consider that if the military, and just like anybody else, if you have the power to stop harm and you choose not to, then it means that you kind of messed up a little bit. Like you can imagine, I'm going to use a really extreme example. If you were in the supermarket and you saw a sleazy guy that for all you knew was a pedophile, take a 4-year-old girl away from their mother that you knew that they were their mother because you saw them interacting before in the store. So in your mind, you're thinking, man, it looks like that guy's a pedophile and he's about to kidnap that little girl, and you decide to do nothing, then, you're not like directly participating in it, but you're allowing it to happen, and you're less than certainly perfect and helpful. And you've been complicit in this act. And so it's a very similar situation. The military is in a position, the right of authority, the right or the role of them defending and protecting the rights of the people and the Constitution falls squarely on their shoulders. Government has failed utterly. So it's the military, our law enforcement, the people that we put in roles by giving our God-given rights to so that they can defend and protect our rights, the law enforcement, the peace officers, and the military. If they don't choose to do nothing, then it falls on us, but we're not there yet. So at this point, no one around the world can possibly take the whole land of the free and home of the brave act seriously anymore. Myanmar is obviously more serious about preventing voter fraud than our own government and military appear to be for now. I just read that, apologies. So yeah, again, don't read into that too much. The whole point is we want to emphasize that at present, the government unquestionably has failed, and hopefully the military decides to do something. To our readers, we've been following the mass arrests and military tribunal narratives. It all probably looks strikingly familiar. The big difference, it's actually happening in their case. Take a look at what's been happening in Myanmar. So as we discussed, we covered that stuff in Myanmar. I want to get to the part. So if you get a chance, go to the article, and there's a photo of none other than Hillary Clinton and Obama sitting with the person who was fraudulently elected, Aung San Suu Kyi. They're like literally holding hands. It's a funny photo, actually. It's got like Keck faces and Pepe the Frog faces, and there's one like depicted as Trump in the background. It's pretty funny. There's another photo in there with Hillary Clinton and this woman who was elected, and Hillary's got that like telltale fake like smile that you just saw like to the point of nauseum in 2016. So Obama was the first sitting president to visit Myanmar, while Clinton seemed to be pleased to ensure democracy in her country, in the country in question. Now, here's another person that was at who went to Myanmar. It's the son of none other than George Soros, Alexander Soros. He paid a visit to Myanmar capital Nai Pi Ta a week before the Chinese president Xi Jinping made his official visit at the behest of President Win Myint on January 17th and 18th last year. So this is a year ago in 2020. Was this some kind of preparation for a voter fraud situation? Wouldn't be surprised. Check it out. You can actually see photos of these two together. And when we have and then we have the possibility of the most damning connection, Smartmatic, one of the companies who are alleged to have taken part in massive voter fraud in the United States, presidential elections, and other elections abroad. So what's the reaction of the media to all this and the Biden administration? Well, it ain't good. Not good for them. I think it's a big blunder, to be perfectly honest. Like, I mean, this is the thing. If somebody goes to you, like, let's say you're running a store, and somebody in the store comes up to you and is like, hey man, this guy just like pocketed like a bunch of your stuff and he's about to walk out of your store. And your response is, nope, you didn't do that. And how dare you how dare you accuse him of doing that? You know, you can't be spreading rumors, you can't be spreading gossip. I mean, it's not a perfect like side-by-side comparison, but it's like that level of insanity. If voter fraud or voter integrity is so important, and somebody is making an accusation, then we should take this accusation very seriously. This is what we rely on our elected officials and our judicial system to do, and they didn't do it. So it's like, you know, what the hell? So here's a statement by Jan Paskey on Burma. This is a trip. Quote, the United States is alarmed by reports that the Burmese military has taken steps to undermine the country's democratic transition, including the arrest of state councilor Aung San Suu Kyi and other civilian officials in Burma. President Biden has been briefed by the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. We continue to affirm our strong support for Burma's democratic institutions, and in coordination with our national partners, urge the military and all other parties to adhere to democratic norms and the rule of law, to release those detained today. The United States opposes any attempts to alter the outcome of recent elections or impede Myanmar's democratic transition, and will take actions against those responsible if these steps are not reversed. We are monitoring the situation closely and stand with the people of Burma, who have already endured so much in their quest for democracy and peace. I mean, the idiocy and the arrogance of these people. I mean, to think that they can, I can guarantee you they probably didn't investigate any of these claims, despite the fact that officials in Myanmar were talking about voter fraud and provided extensive evidence, just like we did here. They didn't examine any of it, and they're making a statement like this. They're presuming that the election process was totally legitimate, that there was no voter fraud, and the military must be trying to have some type of coup unlawfully. Well, it's actually the reverse. The rule of law dictates that you follow the laws of the land, the positive laws of the land, the legal policies, as much as possible, unless these laws are either inherently corrupt or unlawful, or B, the elected officials aren't following the letters of the law, and they need to be removed from power because they've broken their oath and they're acting in a treasonous and seditious capacity. That is exactly what happened in Myanmar. You know, I haven't seen the evidence, but I can pretty much guarantee you that's probably what happens, because look what happened in the United States. Anybody with 3 brain cells can understand that, you know, our election process was severely meddled. The very fact that they didn't even bother investigating any of it, the very fact that the courts, including the Supreme Court, didn't look at a single shred of evidence and threw out the whole process on a technicality, should speak volumes to you. Again, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, something really wrong happened that you say you care about, don't you want to look at it? And you don't even look at the evidence at all. I mean, I'm going to use another extreme example. It's like you have you're the principal of a school, and one of the parents comes to you and says, hey, the teacher of my kid, I've got it on video, he's abusing my kid. And the superintendent, the principal's like, no, sorry, that's BS. And how dare you accuse my teacher of doing that? We're going to, press charges against you for doing that kind of thing. I mean, that's kind of what's happening. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is a massive story. I mean, the no doubt that the Anons and the people who are going to be researching this are going to find all sorts of interesting connections. We've already got a couple other things that we'll probably be reporting on here on Stillness in the Storm in coming days, most likely tomorrow. So I want to offer you in closing here that, I think that this might be connected in some way to things. It's this idea of voter fraud happening is nothing new. It's been happening for a long time, a really long time. For as long as elections have been around, there have been people trying to game and rig them. And they take advantage of our naiveness, our unwillingness to pursue and ask hard questions and get to the bottom of the situation, and our desire to have the appearance of the rule of law instead of the true rule of law. When we have the appearance of the rule of law, that's called the color of law. So I wanted to get this story out and this video out as quickly as possible. I'm a little, unpolished than what I normally would like to be, but, I think this is important. and I'll sacrifice a little bit of word flubs to get this information out. I think it's important. I want to close this by saying, from a psychological warfare perspective, psychological operation, PSYOP perspective, that is critical to, it is critical to understand that any military operation like we're seeing, if the military is going to, shut down a government and basically put in a transitionatory governing body to deal with the election situation, that's a lot to swallow. If they don't have a psychological selling point, if they don't sell the idea to the people that this is good, and when I say sell, I don't mean that it's BS. I mean, you have to persuade. We have to use persuasion. Anytime you talk to anybody, that is a psychological operation, because you're influencing their mind, their perception, what they believe, what they might do. And so that's a valid component. Then we have to understand that that's a valid part of the situation. And so why is it important for the Biden administration to come out and say that, what's happened is, bad and we shouldn't be doing it? Well, it's because they have to maintain their psychological operation that all elections are free and fair. That, of course, this leader that Obama and Hillary Clinton and others visited, they must be good guys. And if for the military to go after them and arrest them, it's so abhorrent. Well, they want regular people to believe that, because it's the idea that a military could lawfully and justly overthrow a government to defend and protect the people and the rule of law. They want to get regular people to believe that the idea that the military could do this is itself something that is completely untrue and obviously wrong, incredulous. That's what they want. So they have to deal with this story this way. They might act. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next coming days and weeks. But I want everybody here to realize that it is essential for us to know the facts and to share this information with those we know and love, and to have these conversations. I know we've been taught, we can't talk about politics, and if we do, we're bad and all this shenanigans, but there's a reason why. There's a reason why they don't want us to talk about politics. There's a reason why we have to be politically correct, because it creates a cover for corrupt, malevolent, insidious, wicked people to do all sorts of nasty things. And this is how good people do nothing. So thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, go to stillnessinthestorm.com/donate. Please make a contribution. It greatly helps so we can keep getting news and information like this out there. Also, go to emfharmonized.com and if you use this link, if you use the link in the description and you go to stillnessinthestorm/EMF Harmonized, we'll get a little bit of commission from this to also help us fund. I mean, we're totally reader supported. So if it wasn't for, affiliate stuff and donations, we wouldn't survive. We'd have to close down shops. We really appreciate your support. You can get a device that helps protect your phone, protect you from your cell phone's radiation that it emits and Wi-Fi signals. So thanks so much for watching, everybody. Much